Daniel Mateo said NFTs and Bitcoins are as the global reserve currency. Well, before we go into the global reserve currency, why don't we talk about what Ray Dalio said about Bitcoin being outlawed? Here's what Ray Dalio had to say about Bitcoins being outlawed. The founder of the $150 billion hedge fund Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest, made a case that there's a good probability Bitcoin could be outlawed, similar to when the U.S. government made it illegal to privately own gold. As Dalio points out in his upcoming book, The Changing World Order, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 made it illegal for individuals to own gold because government leaders didn't want to compete. They didn't want gold to compete with money and credit as a storehold of wealth. Something similar would happen with Bitcoin, which has surged against a backdrop of a high level of debt, low interest rates, a lot of liquidity and stimulus, and investors seeking alternative to bonds and currencies. Every country, here's what he says, every country treasures its monopoly on controlling the supply and demand. Very powerful statement. I'm going to read that again. Every country treasures its monopoly on controlling the supply and demand.
Sure.
They don't want other monies to be operating or competing because things can get out of control. So I think that it would be very likely that you will have it under a certain set of circumstances outlawed the way gold was outlawed. Thoughts, Matt Sapaula?
Well, gold was outlawed, 1933? And in terms of holding possession of actual physical gold. And then it was Gerald Ford, 1974, that said, okay, you can have it back. They repealed it. Is this potentially something that Bitcoin can be outlawed temporarily for that 30, 40-year process until the government can figure out what type of role that Bitcoin can play in our economy? I've always said this from the beginning, my position on it in the beginning. Bitcoin sounds cool, it sounds very good, but there's a difference in my investing world of intrinsic value and imputed value. Intrinsic value means there's an actual asset that's actually generating value behind the company. Imputed value is what you think it's worth. For me as an investor, and me not coming from any money, driving a bus as a kid, and now I'm starting to make money, it doesn't mean I'm frivolous with money, just throw money at things. For me, it's hard for me to personally bank on. Again, I wouldn't put my retirement savings here, money that needs to be there, into something that, and again, I'm not giving financial advice, but I'm saying that for something that is imputed, it's kind of hard to see the government saying, we're going to release control of the number one way to control American citizens into something that's decentralized. It's only one government regulation away from Bitcoin being outlawed and the opportunity being stripped away from it temporarily.
Curious, if you're watching this, comment below, do you think Ray Dalio is right and there's going to be some kind of a Bitcoin being outlawed or controlled by the government? Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Ray's not trying to make a controversy here. I think he's really looking at a historical case study because the governments, they control the interest rates, they control the money supply, M1, M2, and they're out there want to have the knobs of the economy, and they don't want a secondary, currency or value under there. That's why the whole thing happened from the Gold Reserve Act in 1934. So I don't think Ray's trying to be controversial, but I think that the governments with the fiat currencies, and fiat currency meaning currencies that are not backed up by gold or silver, they're just the implied trading value at that moment as compared to other currencies. They don't want to lose that because they lose control of the actual economy itself, and there's secondary economies. There is a case study on this, and it is Russia. And the joke during the Reagan administration with Russia is like, hey, Russia can come to the monetary trading system once they have a currency of defined value that can be traded against other currencies. And remember, the ruble was a joke at the time. Remember that? And people said, what are you talking about? They do have a currency that trades against other currencies. It says it's green. It's got pictures of U.S. presidents on it. And so the joke was that it was U.S. currency was the hard currency in Russia that the Russians would actively conduct commerce on. And that flipped out, the Russian government. So the governments, and there's your case study there. Forget about communism, forget about things. But the Russian government didn't want the U.S. dollar to be, this underground currency. And they put a lot of steps in, try to control that, and it failed. But the governments don't want to give up that control, man.
So go ahead.
PBD, what do you think? I mean, Dalio's got a vested interest to outlaw Bitcoin. I mean, he's a fiat currency guy.
He is a fiat currency guy, but this is my question for you about Bitcoin. Okay, Kyle, I want you to think about this as well from a young standpoint on what you would say about this. So what is more necessary and beneficial selfishly for the government? So think like a politician.
Sure.
think you are Biden, think you are Janet Yellen, who Janet Yellen's been one of the biggest proponents of trying to control Bitcoin. She's not a Bitcoin person. Mm-hmm. She's not necessarily a pro-Bitcoin person, right? Taking Elizabeth Warren. Is Elizabeth Warren pro-Bitcoin? I don't know.
She's a regulation.
She's a regulation person, right? If you look at a Biden, a Elizabeth Warren, a Bernie Sanders, here's what's the weirdest things that's happened. When I talk to people, the guy that sold that NFT, can you pull up NFT underways, everydays? He just did a nice one of Elon Musk yesterday, by the way. I don't know if you saw that or not. Pretty sick one he did yesterday of so he sold this for $69 million. I asked the question in the interview. Tom, you've heard about this, the everydays. It's 5,000 days. Yeah. Every day he designed one, and then he put it together as a collage.
He's very prolific. Beeple,
he's phenomenal, right? So him and I spoke last week, Mike, and I asked the question when he did the auction at Christie's. And Christie's, Christie's auction house, they do bigger things. They do artwork. They do stuff that's physical. He said there were 33 bidders, active bidders, the last hour of the item. It was like at 14 million, ended up selling for 69 million. I asked the question, I said, 14 million, 33 bidders? He said, yeah. I said, out of those 33 bidders, how many of them are Bitcoin millionaires? He said, all of them. Wow. They're all Bitcoin people, cryptocurrency people. So which means what? Every once in a while, something comes in where most people don't take advantage of it, okay? Where an average regular Joe who is a little bit, different, weird, people call him crazy, people call him out of the ordinary, ends up buying into it, and they put $1,000 in Bitcoin when it was nothing, a quarter, $1, $2, $10, $30, whatever it is. They put $10,000 into it. Now they're millionaires. Now they have money. Some of them have real money. Some of them have a few $100 million. A few of them are crypto billionaires that are out there, right? Okay. What happens when people are popping out being billionaires and millionaires in an industry that not many people looked at and trusted, and there was a community that was doing, I don't know if maybe there's going to be some stuff that's going on that's shady. Now they have that money. Okay. So how much money was being made selling cocaine years ago? And I'm not making a comparison. The only reason I'm saying this, I'm going to a place with this. How much money is cocaine per year? How much money is pot per year? How big of a business is it? How much money was alcohol? When bootleggers used to make money behind, how much money is it, right?
Prohibition days, yep.
Is the government more concerned about control and the worry of currency manipulation with Bitcoin? Or is the government more concerned about collecting taxes? Because if you do overregulate crypto or Bitcoin or any of that, then where do you collect the taxes from all these people that are making billions of dollars? That's revenue going back to the government. So what's more important to the U.S. government? The control of the currency to not be able to manipulate our current fiat currency, or the ability to collect more taxes and add a tax to it? So again, let me go a little deeper so this makes sense to you. Sure. So maybe there is no regulation, but maybe there's a Bitcoin tax. Mm-hmm. Maybe they said we're not going to regulate it, but we're going to add a 15, the same thing they said the weed tax in New York, 13%, 9 goes to the state, 4 goes to the localities. Mm-hmm. What if there is a tax on Bitcoin rather than a regulation? Is the government thinking revenue, or is the government thinking control? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think control is taxation. I think if you're going to control it, it's because you want to tax it. And then if you can tax it, you can find a way to manipulate it. I think it's both, PBD.
Great point.
When Russell Okung, the NFL player, said, pay half of my $13 million
in Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin. I mean, so how do you tax now half of his salary? When the other half of his salary, it's easy, 40% whop to, just chop right off to the income taxes. But the other half of his salary went from 6.5 to 8.5, 10. You can't tax it because it's Bitcoin. So I think it's both, PBD.
Tom.
I think the conservative side of government wants reasonable controls. And I think the highly liberal side of government wants to tax everything with controls. So I think it's a little bit of both. And I think the central banks and the money policy people, they want the control back because they control the world's, financial system.
Tom, if you and I, you've been in the world of dealing with investors for a long time, right?
Yep.
An investor, if you represent an investor and he brings in the money, okay, what are some ways investors control the entrepreneur? What are some ways, if you were to tell us, I know it, I'm just hearing from you so the audience can, what are some ways the investor says, I'll give you this $5 million, I'll give you this $50 million, but these are the controls. What are some ways the investor controls the entrepreneur?
Well, the most common thing that people find with venture investment or private equity investment is what's called the preferred position. They have what's called preferred stock. So they get to approve every transaction over X. And then there's the operating committee. You have your boards, and they get a couple board seats. So now they got a certain number of boards. So they put these control that in exchange for my money, I get these controls because you're a nice entrepreneur. I want to make a buck on you. We all want to make a buck on this. But we're going to be on your board controlling these things. And then you can't spend or do things beyond a certain limit here. Or bad things happen, and so they put controls around their money. And
how many controls are there? Like let me maybe you're not going as deep as it can be. So one is preferred, the other one is voting control.
Correct.
The other one is how much money you can pay for yourself for salary.
Sure.
The other one is how much money you can spend in one transaction. So if you're going to do anything that you're going to spend over $50,000, you need our approval. $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever.
How much the profit money is a bonus for executives versus a dividend back to them.
To everybody that they participate in. There is so many different ways that they create controls, right?
Correct.
Here's a question for you. Historically, what are some ways the U.S. government can impose controls on Bitcoin? Taxation being one of them. What are other creative ways that a Janet Yellen or a Biden administration can create controls on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? Wow, you're spooked. The guy who's Wikipedia is spooked. So all I'm asking is, there are so many creative ways. What is the way? What are they going to do to create controls? You know, tax being one of them, regulation being another one. You know, how much like, you know how remember when the GME, the GameStop stock went up, and then all of a sudden they said what? No more activity, no more activity. Is there a lid to be put on it on how much it can go? Can they price it themselves? You know, one control is coming and saying, hey, gold is worth, what was a dollar amount back in 1934? Whether it was gold worth $29, $34? You remember what the number was?
Per ounce.
36 maybe?
Some number like that, where they said, here, they dictate what it's worth. So what if they come out and they say, we're going to regulate, you say Bitcoin's worth $50,000 per, we're going to put a number on it. Bitcoin is worth $10,000 per. Like, I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. All I'm asking is, you have to anticipate that regulators think very differently than freedom, libertarian, leave me alone entrepreneurs, innovators. So
we have the SEC and the market controls, right?
Okay.
And the SEC influences, used to be the Amex, used to be Chicago Board of Options. You had all these markets out there where you could buy and sell stuff, whether it's fruit and livestock futures or a share of stock or an option on stock. And the SEC has got things in there about volatility and what's called the circuit breakers. If the circuit breakers trip, they suspend trading on things. So they can put tight controls in there that are deemed to protect the investor. Robinhood, remember, limited how many you could trade at a certain day. SEC could step in and do simple things like that. There's a lot of ways that they could control the momentum, the amount, and go back to the, it's not even 100 years ago, the Federal Reserve Act 1934, of how much you can own.
I just thought about something. The easiest way to control and manipulate it is to increase, if you want to pay for something in cash.
Kai, we can hear you.
If they want to pay for something in cash or credit cards at this price, but if they want to pay in Bitcoin, it's this price. Right?
Yeah, the other part is like, look what happened with the industry you and I are a part of, right? You got a Joseph Kennedy who gets recruited by a Roosevelt to come in and try to figure out the stock market manipulation. And Joseph Kennedy calls a meeting apparently that says, hey, everybody needs to come to New York who's selling stocks. And people didn't show up. And it's like, wait a minute, you better listen to me and show up. They didn't show up. So he says, you know what? The only way you can sell stocks moving forward is you have to pass a license called the Series 7. Then everybody ended up showing up. Then he said, the only way you can sell it, you have to fingerprint, because back then there were cash that was being handled. So they came and do fingerprint. We're doing fingerprinting till today. We don't even touch cash. We don't even know why we're doing fingerprinting till today, right? So there's an element of licensing. There's an element of, you know, those are the things like how all of it, they're pretty creative when they come out with regulation. Kai, do you have something in mind you want to share with us?
Yeah, no. So I think the biggest thing for them also now that essentially, because Bitcoin you keep in a wallet, right? That wallet essentially the government really doesn't have access to. They don't know how much is in there, depending on how much you've earned. If you buy in low, you sell high, kind of this, that, and the other. So I think a big part of it is that money can sit in the wallet and you're not paying any capital gains or anything of that kind. So now that, say, Tesla is allowing you to buy a Bitcoin, right? Or buy a car with a Bitcoin.
Yep.
I think that's the only place where government realistically can then go in and take a piece of the pie, because now they can see, oh, you have that, you're trading that value. So then they have to come in with some sort of tax there, because if not, the Bitcoin can just sit in a wallet and that money can store, that money can stay there, it can grow, yada, yada, yada. Or the other way is when you then put that money from the Bitcoin into your bank, then it's kind of like, oh, suddenly you have 40 million here. What's going on, Mr. XYZ? So for regulation or just purposes of taxes, I think that they're going to have to find a way to tax spending money with Bitcoin on buying something in that transaction. You have to find a way to kind of get a piece of the pie there.
I remember when, you're right, Kai. I remember when there's a point in time you can buy something on Amazon or eBay without having paid tax on it. There's no tax on it. Now there's
That's right.
Now there's tax on it.
That's right.
So this is just another evolution. Can they stop Bitcoin? I don't think they can, but they can find a way to tax it.
Yeah.
Well, there was also that long ago, you could commit several wire transactions and you could effectively obfuscate what you were doing with money. And then the federal government said, okay, to control it, they forced the banks to be the reporting agency and be not really the cop, but the reporting agency. So what's the limit on a wire transaction now where the bank has to turn in your social security number and the wire transaction? 10 grand, right?
Yeah.
A deposit of $10,000 in a bank, the banks have to report it, correct?
Yep.
So now the government's got in exchange for FDIC insurance, you have to, and all these other benefits of connecting to the money supply and the overnight borrowing rate for all the banks. Now you have to tell us every time there's a transaction of over $10,000.
That's a good point.
So now they're collecting all the information so they can come back to you on an audit and say, Matt, you had all these wires going back and forth. You can no longer hide where your money's going from. Was this income or is this savings to checking? What was going on here?
Yep.
And they know it. So there's a lot of other controls that go in there. That was one of the first. We talk about the government having too much data on us and things like this. That was a data gold mine for the IRS auditors. Now they had the banks recording and reporting every $10,000 transaction.
So banks would have FDIC. If the bank was to go into default, the banks have FDIC. Correct. If a brokerage went to default, they have the SIPC. What would it be for crypto? What would it be for Bitcoin? There is none.
Well, there wasn't those until they needed them, was there?
Correct. Until people started losing a lot of money, and there it is. There's a protection.
So you're saying if all of a sudden a lot of people lose money and there's a dramatic drop off, then we may have an SIPC type of a thing set up?
Correct.
Got it. Interesting.
That's the regulation. Yep. To protect the consumer.
There'll be a crisis, and the government will say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And in the name of protecting us, there will be regulations and systems put in place. We got Homeland Security protecting us as we go on airplanes. Now, that didn't exist, right? But we had a crisis, and now we have a new government agency. And as Ronald Reagan said, there's never anything so permanent as a temporary government program.
That's where seatbelts and stop signs and stoplights came from, because somebody got into a wreck, cost people their lives.
Okay, crypto right now is at $53,000, right? Crypto right now is at $53,000. What's more likely, crypto going to $1 million or crypto going to 10,000?
Ooh, good one. I'm the optimist. I'm going to $1 million.
$1 million.
Oh, you wait a minute. You think 10,000? So
could it go back to 10,000 on a sell spike, a spike of selling momentum that drives the price down? Sure, it could. But the limited supply of crypto is like limited supply of real estate in Malibu. The way that works, that limited supply ensures scarcity. So I think there is actually, could it touch 10 grand on a trading blip where you had so many people trading on a certain day? Sure. But I think long term, it's more likely that it continues to trend to $1 million.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.